Good afternoon, and welcome to the Advocacy Skills, How to Effectively Advocate at the Local Level panel. My name is Jeannette Ruiz, pronoun she, her, and I'm the Program and Communications Manager for the Miami Climate Alliance. The MCA is a network of individuals and organizations working on people-centered and just solutions to our climate crisis. I'm very excited to be moderating this panel and to speak with some rockstar advocates that will no doubt give you some gems to take away today. But first, I wanted to briefly share my story and how I came to be your moderator. In 2018, I was working in the private sector and co-hosting a podcast called Planted in Miami. We interviewed Zalala Madefers from Catalyst Miami about their upcoming CLEAR program. For those of you who may not be familiar, CLEAR stands for Community Leadership on the Environment, Advocacy, and Resilience. My husband and I ended up taking the 10-week course and learning so much. Not only did we learn about climate change and its effects globally and more specifically locally, but I learned what I personally could do about it by sharing my lived experience and encouraging others to do the same. Once the course was over, I was hungry for more. Having lived in Miami all my life, I had never really advocated for anything before, but I felt empowered and motivated, and Catalyst provided other ways to get plugged in, so I joined the family. Also, as if the universe was pushing me in a certain direction, the Miami Climate Alliance was looking for a coordinator, so I applied and got the job. Now I was working full-time and then some on climate justice. I was all in. Since then, I've been a part of numerous campaigns, spoken at commissioner meetings, although I was nervous and my voice cracked, I persisted, visited Tallahassee twice for days to engage with elected officials, and so much more. Basically, I've been on the advocacy fast track for the last 3 years and have picked up a few skills here and there. This is why this panel is near and dear to my heart. And for those who think this is a young person's game, I'll be 43 in August and I'm just getting started. And to bring it full circle, on February 17th, Catalyst will be offering the CLEAR program virtually again, and I will be co-facilitating this time. So that's my story, and I'm very eager to hear the journeys of our two panelists, Roxey Nelson and Leah Weston. So Roxey, let me do Roxey first. Roxey Nelson is currently the Vice President and Assistant Regional Director for 1199 SEIU, United Healthcare Workers East in Florida, representing more than 25,000 healthcare workers throughout Florida and over 400,000 nationally. 1199 SEIU, United Healthcare Workers East is the largest and fastest growing healthcare union in America. In her current role, Nelson centers 1199 SEIU Florida Region's core strategic growth initiatives and manages all aspects of organizational design, development, and change across the state. Leah Weston is a lawyer and policy wonk who currently serves as a senior aide to Chief Operations Officer Jimmy Morales in the Office of Miami-Dade County Mayor Daniella Levine Cava. In this role, she manages the legislative process for the Departments of Transportation and Public Works, Solid Waste Management, Regulatory and Economic Resources, and the Water and Sewer Department. Prior to this role, Leah worked as Policy Director for City of Miami Commissioner Ken Russell. She is a Miami native and a graduate of the University of Miami and the University of Miami School of Law. So, welcome panelists. First question is for both of you, but I will start with Roxey. Please share your personal journey and what brought you to this work. And for the audience, we will be taking questions later, so please drop them in the chat box as you think of them. Roxey, you have the floor.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so glad to be here with civic-minded folks who are thinking about how to change our community starting at the ground level. And I appreciate, Jeannette, the introduction. For me, the journey here has been one of sort of love and conviction. I graduated from undergrad in the late 90s. And had a job where I was interning at a Fortune 100 company. And I knew since I was young, I would, organize protests and walkouts and since I was a teenager. But, as an immigrant Black woman in America whose family teaches you to, be able to provide for yourself, it never occurred to me that that type of work, my passion work, could be a job. And so I took a corporate job that I did for about 3 years. And I remember it was a winter day in December and my alarm went off at 6 a.m. And I looked at it and I thought to myself, I cannot do this for the rest of my life. And I went in that day to my employer and I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go volunteer for my congressman on Fridays. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, you can get your work done? And I said, I think so. And he was like, well, do you? And which I was super lucky and super blessed to have a boss like that. And I started doing that. And I don't know if anybody's worked in community, local, all of you have, in politics, but once they see someone has skills and time and you're willing to volunteer, they're like, suck you up and let you do stuff. So I immediately started to play. And in that play, I started doing political organizing around the country. And in that work of political organizing, every time we were at the, GOTV weekend, or we needed to talk to 10,000 more people, like in whatever state I was in, it was always, whether it was carpenters or nurses, or there were always union workers showing up. And I was like, what is this? And I had no idea, right, about labor in that way. And from that work of organizing politically and meeting folks from the labor movement, I recognized that in talking to them, I'm like, you guys do this for a living? Someone pays you to do this? And it was pretty awesome. And so that realization made me start to investigate opportunities in organized labor. And I started organizing. I met lots of folks from SEIU, from AFSCME, from other locals. And in my organizing, it led me to the South largest hospital worker organizing drive in 2006 in America, and was a part of that campaign and loved Florida so much that I decided to stay. And so I've been at SEIU 1199 ever since then. Grounding our union represents healthcare workers, as Jeannette said, and leading our public policy, political, and grassroots campaign work. So that's how I've gotten here. Thanks for the question.
Awesome. Florida's lucky to have you. Okay, Leah.
My turn. Roxy, that was a great story. Very interesting. So my path, it's funny to weave it together in a narrative, because to me, it just feels like a series of things that have one thing led to another. And it's very funny to me that I work in government right now, because I was not the kind of person who was involved in student government ever. I was never attracted to politics as a young person, but a few things happened in my life that completely changed the way that I looked at the world. Probably the most important event that affected my worldview was in 2005. I was starting my sophomore year at Tulane University in New Orleans. I'm from Miami, but I went to Tulane originally. And in 2005, as I was, helping with the freshman move-in, somebody stood up on a table and said, you all need to evacuate. There's a hurricane coming. And, Hurricane Katrina happened. And I just remember, I evacuated. I was fine. I was safe. But I just remember watching on CNN, people in poor neighborhoods standing on their roofs. And it just all occurred to me at once what racism looks like in this country. That visual just stuck with me forever. And it really inspired me to get more involved. I ended up leaving New Orleans and moving back permanently to Miami in 2006. And I finished up college, and I got really into human rights activism in college, but I started getting more involved in the local community in Miami, particularly around bicycling issues. And the reason I got involved in that was because it was a fun social group, and I met a bunch of people who were really interested in improving the city. And that was a great introduction to how local government works, because when you're advocating for bicycle and pedestrian issues, you're intersecting with local government, and because local government is the one that's responsible for street design and pedestrian safety. So I started learning a lot more about local government and became an activist myself, and decided that, so I graduated college right into the financial crisis in 2008. And, the economy had collapsed, and I was trying to figure out what to do next. I took some time off. I just, I worked, I had a job, nothing special. Just got really involved in the community. And I decided the best thing to do would be to go to law school. Not particularly because I wanted to practice law, but because I felt like law is just the way that society works. And I felt as though it would really just be a way to be more effective in advocacy and activism. So I went to law school. at University of Miami, and my first job out of law school was as a postgraduate fellow in the health rights clinic at I provided legal representation to veterans. And so my first job actually was fighting the government. I was fighting the VA, I was fighting Social Security, and doing direct services work. And while I was doing that, I was volunteering on the side. There was a city commission campaign going on in the district where I lived. I lived in Brickell at the time. That's District 2 in the city of Miami, which covers Brickell, it covers Coconut Grove, kind of the economic engine of the city, downtown. And I met this young guy, Ken Russell, who was running for the seat. I really didn't like his opponent at the time, the outgoing commissioner. He had done a lot of things I didn't like, particularly around homelessness. And so I got really involved in the city commission campaign, and I met Ken Russell on a bike ride. I'm serious. And he called me after he won the campaign. He was a dark horse candidate. He beat out, two people they thought were front runners in a crazy runoff race. And he called me on New Year's in 2015 and said, "Would you like to come work for me?" So, I took a little while. I phased out my legal practice at and I started this job working in the city of Miami. I did that for 3 years. I helped lead his policy agenda, prep him for commission meetings. I learned all about the way that government works, and that was an amazing experience. I met all kinds of people. I learned about the role that real estate plays in Miami and how important that is, and really how that is the front line of social injustice in Miami, just the way that real estate operates in Miami. So I did that for a while. I left that job. I took some time, just did some consulting work. And as of this week, I've been for a month now working in the office of our new mayor, Daniella Levine Cava. I work for her chief operations officer, as you said in my introduction, doing local government stuff, managing the legislative process, and hopefully working on some big picture issues that require a lot of interdisciplinary work, like converting 120,000 septic tanks to sewer, working on helping to reorganize our transportation department so that it's less focused on moving cars and more focused on moving people, things like that. So I'm just getting started. It's been like an avalanche in the last 4 weeks, but that's kind of the road that I took to get where I am today.
Awesome. So I always look at this, since I'm new to this world, right? And you guys are, I've been in it a little longer than I have. I'm always interested in not only the journey aspect, but then also the behind the scenes, right? You both are amazingly educated, headstrong women. What advice would you give to someone new who is passionate about some of the things that we talked about, but doesn't really have the confidence, doesn't really know how to start? Like, what would you tell somebody kind of behind the scenes on how to get started?
Do you want to?
Go ahead, Roxey.
Sure. The first thing I think of how to get started is, I remember when I was in my early 20s, I was in a boardroom with an executive that I was invited into. It was a room full of executives, and I didn't speak. And the female leader who had invited me into a room did a one-on-one with me after, and she said, "Why didn't you speak?" And I said to her, like, I'm just at a no. And she was like, "Girl, like, it's fine. I wouldn't invite you in the room if you didn't belong in the room." And I think a year later, I was in the same room. Some of the people had changed. And then I realized we were talking about the same topic they were talking about a year before, in the same way, with not much of change, right, about it. And it occurred to me in that moment, like, oh, she was right. In so many ways, there's no, right, like, we're all just making it up, right? And that you have to show up in the room like you belong. And we always think there's someone smarter or more deserving than us in the room. Imposter syndrome plays a part in it. But I think the first thing I would say is, like, get that in check. And the second thing I would say is, like, relationships are everything in this work. The people that you come up with, your friends, your neighbors, the people that you work with. that it is, you never know, who somebody's going to be later. And so I think cultivating healthy relationships and utilizing those relationships is key. I think 3, being curious, not just being transactional with the relationship, but really be engaging other humans to understand a thing about them and connect is where I would start, right? And then I would say that the world has shifted, right? The access to information and resource is at our fingertips. And so I oftentimes, when I'm developing like our members, we develop and train our members to have relationships with their elected officials, and they're CNAs and nurses, and they're like, that's not what we do. We're not a lawyer. Well, you don't have to be, right? You can look up your elected official. So who is your elected official? What happens at the federal, state, and local levels, and what jurisdictions do they have? Those are things that are available to us to research and find out. So the other thing I would say is just, be empowered and use the resources and tools you have to get as much knowledge as you have to be able to engage and build the confidence that you want. And the final thing that I would say is that I'm ending in the way I think I started with, is keeping imposter syndrome in check, which is there is no smart person there, ahead of you or in the room that knows so much more than you. That means that you shouldn't speak. There's also on the things that you're passionate about. If you're advocating about something you're passionate about and that so our workers at 1199 are CNAs and nurses, and they work in hospitals and nursing homes, and they provide care. And for example, there was a legislator last year that filed a bill about nursing homes, but he was a farmer. And so who's the better expert to speak to what the reality is of the thing that's happening? So I think the way that I would end is like, know yourself. If you're passionate and know the topic you're talking about, recognize yourself as an expert. And that a lot of time elected officials, they come from a space and a time too. They have their own profession, and sometimes they deal with issues that are all over the place. And so they're grateful, right, for someone who has subject matter expert and can bring that to bear to help them. I'm sure Leah will attest to that. And so I think that's how I think about it, starting with building your confidence and knowing that you don't have to be perfectly smart or educated, whatever it needs to be to do this work. And then starting with like the things that you do day to day that you love and feel passionate on, you are the expert, and your voice and your story is key, is what I would say. Leah, what are your thoughts?
I love that advice. I'm going to add on a little bit to that, because I don't think I need to say anything more on, imposter syndrome and whether or not you feel like you should be in a room. I'll say this: if you're interested in getting involved in your local community, I would say learn who all the local journalists are. Start following them on Twitter or social media. Read the Miami Herald. We're in Miami here, but I'm sure there are people from elsewhere. Read your local newspaper. Start to inform yourself about what people are talking about. And then ask a lot of questions. I mean, nobody is born knowing this stuff. I just had this conversation with someone the other day, and I was explaining, ethics rules and some complicated things. And I said, no one is born knowing this. Go get trained on it. Go ask somebody who's been in it for a while. I know I always make myself available to people, and whatever they want, I want to ask you questions about local government. Make an introduction. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask for what you want. If you don't know something, ask someone who's doing the work that you admire. And, a lot of people this summer are newly involved and newly waking up to politics. Like the protests of this summer have woken up a lot of people and gotten people interested. Get off of Instagram, go meet people. Relationships are everything. Roxey, you're exactly right. I think maybe there might be a question about this a little later in the panel. But one thing I want to emphasize is that every single person who's an elected official, and I know a lot of elected officials now in my life, not because, like I said, not because I ever grew up like being passionate, like I want to go into government. They're just people, particularly local elected officials. I mean, they're just people. They're everyday people. They're your neighbors. They stepped up to take on a lot of responsibility. In the county, for example, the elected officials are paid like $6,000 a year. It's not a full-time job. They often have professions. They have, they live in your community. So don't put them up on a pedestal, be respectful, be nice to their staff, and learn from them. But they're not to be worshiped. They are people in your community who were elected, and you could run for office. You could do the same thing. So I agree, Roxey, relationships are everything. Don't rely on Instagram slides to teach you what you need to know. Rely on people. Rely on the people who've been doing the work for a long time, and ask lots of questions. Don't be afraid. We always want more people to be involved and getting informed and moving issues, because from an insider's perspective in government, things only move if we have outside forces helping them move. And that's not just being adversarial and opposing things you oppose, which is very important, but it's also saying thank you and supporting the things that you want to move along. So that I think would be my advice for getting started. Read your local newspaper, get informed, and ask people who you look up to. Lots of questions.
I'm like jotting down tons of notes. You guys gave me 6 bullet points already. So going back to you, Leah, what do you think is the best way to make change at the government level as a community member?
Well, aside from running for office yourself, which I encourage people who are thinking about it to do, because the talent pool is surprisingly small, and there are a lot of barriers. And I don't want to get too into the barriers of campaign finance and the reasons that people don't run, but I also think that a lot of people, it just doesn't occur to people, like, I could run for office, but that's a pretty extreme level of engagement. So, if you're just on the outside and you want to live your life, but you also care about some issues, how can you be most effective? Well, I know this is simple, but always be nice, like always be respectful, because you're just not going to get anywhere by yelling at somebody. There are moments where you need to be adversarial and you need to push, but be nice to staff, try to establish relationships with people's staff. Oftentimes what people don't realize is that the elected official is the figurehead. It's the staff that's moving things. It's the staff that knows what's going on. It's the staff that knows the procedures and who you need to talk to. So build relationships with people in your elected official's office. Get to know them. Send them an email, say, hi, I live in this district. I'm concerned about this issue. Or really go visit the office when it's not pandemic time, and get to know people in person, because like I said, they're your neighbors. How else to be effective? Get to know who does what. So you mentioned the word jurisdiction, Roxey. I think that's a very important word. Jurisdiction means who has responsibility over this issue. It's not going to help you to go yell at your city commissioner about an issue that your city commissioner does not have control over. So learning to direct your, whatever you're upset about at the right person is part of it. Learn who your elected officials are. Go online, go type in your address, learn if you live in a city, learn who your county officials are, learn who represents you in the state legislature, and then learn who your federal officials are. Miami is a very complicated place. We have a patchwork of jurisdictions. Sometimes every time I like to say that we have 36 mayors, right? Because we have the mayor of Miami-Dade County, but we have individual municipalities. You may live in a municipality, so you may be elected by 4 different sets of elected officials. Figure out what they do, what issues they work on. It's very easy to get this information. And what else? I mean, there's probably people who are more expert in other strategies like media, and there's somebody I really respect who's been in politics for a long time says that elected officials respond to a few things. It's media, money, and attention. So try to figure out where the pressure points are, but the establishing relationships, I think, is really the most important way to be effective, because if you know the people on the inside, it's just easier to move things if you have a relationship.
And you want me to pick this one up?
Please.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to what Leah has said is just to underscore more the piece that she is talking about knowing your elected official. It's having a power analysis is what we call it in organizing, right? So the jurisdiction piece, who has the power to actually make the thing you want to happen, and then understanding who they care about, what they care about, because that helps you get a sense of what your strategy should be, right? The art of advocacy is about persuasion. We use inspiration, we use stories, we are trying to motivate folks to see the world the way that we see it. Then we're trying to make that happen and then have the systems of power turn to shift, right? We're trying to make transformation. And so I think it's really critical that we have an analysis of power and how we strategically influence the people who need to be influenced and who have the power to give us the change that we're seeking.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that, for folks especially who are new to the advocacy world, is seek out these organizations that are doing this work and providing this information and training to the community, because it could be quite daunting if you don't know where to go, right? It's like, yes, we have the information readily available, but people are busy, people are working, people have families. So sometimes they just get discouraged because they don't know where to start. But organizations like Catalyst Miami, Engage Miami, Flick, like they're the ones who are there to help people and to guide them on whatever they may feel passionate about, right? So I want to just give a shout out to our local organizations and organizations all across the state who are doing this work.
Can I add one thing I forgot?
Yeah.
So I forgot to talk about voting, which I can't believe I forgot. But voting. So voting is a very powerful act because, especially in local elections where the margins are so small, if you turn out to vote 1,000 people, that can make or break an election on the local level. And also help your friends to vote. I mean, a lot of people maybe who are watching this who know me know that I published like an epic voting guide in 2020 and in 2018. Helped a lot of people vote. It's not because I care that people vote the way that I think. It's because I want people to feel confident voting. And even if they end up disagreeing with my conclusions, at least, I'm trying to help people figure out what they should think about when they vote. So help your friends vote. Voting is a very powerful thing. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that before.
Thanks, Leah. So this question is for the both of you again. What tips do you have around public speaking and public testimony? We'll start with Roxey.
Know how much time you have, and put the really critical things up front, I would say. But really, when you're lobbying or you're public speaking, we live in a world where you don't have 20, 30 minutes to get your point across. You have 5 minutes, right? If you're lucky. And so you gotta have a wrap down. You have to know what's critical. Again, who are you trying to move and what is most likely to move them? You have to understand who you're talking to, understand your audience. And then I think time, length, important stuff up front. And then I think it's really important that when you go to advocate, that you, I lost my train of thought, but I think that just lost my train of thought just like that. When we go into advocate, I think it's really critical that we understand the time constraints that we have, that we lead with that's this the piece, that we lead with our own stories, right? Because I think sometimes we go in, and I've had lots of members do this, of like, they want to give all the data and all the stats, and that's good, right? You can do that on a leave behind on a piece of paper because people can read stats. What really moves people is when you are able to make a human connection and they understand the impact the thing has on real people. And I think Leah talked about what elected officials care about, right? they care about the people that vote for them, right? In addition to money and to media, right? All of that leads back to them to be able to move people to vote for them. And so if you can be from where, if you can be from their hood, right? And be telling them a story about the reality that's happening in their community that they have responsibility for, they can guesstimate that if one person is having that issue, that then potentially there are hundreds, right? And so I think the ability, just to repeat, be succinct, understand the person that you're communicating, your audience, and make sure that you're putting the important stuff up front, and that important stuff should be connected to your personal story as you are advocating. So that's what I would offer. Thank you.
Yeah, great advice. I'll say, just based on watching many hours of public testimony in the years that I've been in government, that I've seen the good and the bad. So yes, powerful is a personal connection. Don't drown people in data. They're just going to tune it out. Normally you have 2 minutes. So you got to get your point across in 2 minutes. One of the biggest things that I see repeatedly that happens particularly around very controversial issues where it mobilizes a lot of people to turn out to a commission meeting, for example, is that an organization will send out talking points or a sample public testimony. I strongly encourage people to personally tailor that and not read off of talking points, because the first thing that happens when you have a group of people who show up all reading the same points is that the commission, who maybe doesn't want to hear this particular perspective, just dismisses it and says, this is an outside group. They were all coordinated. They all read the same talking points. So just try to avoid that kind of dismissal by taking the time and crafting a statement that is personal to you. Even if you use some of the talking points that are provided by an organization, take the time to craft a personal statement. If it's shorter, that's fine. You don't have to fill a whole 2 minutes, but it's much more powerful if every person, even if they're all affiliated with the same organization, has something a little bit different or more personal to say about an issue. I also think that just respect time limits. Don't get cut off. Be succinct. Be powerful, and stick to the issue. Try not to engage in attacks on a particular elected official, because that ends up working against you. It ends up shutting them down and not really being receptive. And also another thing that I think is really important is don't just show up on commission day and say your piece in 2 minutes. The engagement needs to happen before and after, because if you just show up on a particular day, what a lot of people don't realize is that many hours and steps before that happened, so that the momentum is often already, like the train has left the station. A great example is on the county budget. That is a document that is prepared a year in advance, and by the time it arrives at the commission, it's pretty much fully cooked, and it's really hard to get big shifts in the budget. Now, there are some structural reasons for that long-term could be reformed, but still, being engaged with the process beforehand and throughout the year, it's what happens in that 2 minutes of your public speaking needs to be the culmination and not just the only touch point.
So elaborate on that a bit, because how can the average citizen be plugged in to what is going on? Let's use the budget, for example. What are ways that are the entry points, that they can essentially stay informed? Because personally, I'm speaking from personal experience, I don't see many postings about, look, hey, we're working on the budget, want to come help us? So it's like, how do we stay on top of it?
Well, you're never going to see that posting. And again, this goes to the longer term structural issues. The whole process needs to be redesigned so that it's designed for public engagement. But putting that aside, I mean, I suggest going back and reading the budget long before budget season starts and making your requests before the hearings ever begin. So the hearings I'm just using the budget as an example because it affects everybody. The budget gets passed no matter what in September, or I think it's September or October. The very next day, the budget for next year is being prepared. Start reading the budgets, start understanding what's in it, and saying, well, maybe, we didn't get it this year, but the very next day, next year, write to your commissioner and say, this year's budget doesn't include enough for this thing that I'm interested in. How can we get more in the budget for X, for social services, for, parks, for whatever the issue is that you care about. Start engaging them the year before, because by the time it arrives, it's already cooked. And that's probably the case in a lot of things you see. Now, if a bunch of people show up to oppose a piece of legislation, you might be able to rally at the end and have a victory. But with the budget in particular, start at the end, right? Like the budget document's passed, and start when that's over, everything is anew. So I would say, trying to build it all goes back to building the relationships and trying to get information and asking questions and keeping that engagement throughout the year.
I would just add on to it's knowing the process and where are the points in the process that you have opportunity for impact. And I think just to underscore what Leah just said, it's like, we think sometimes there's going to be a hearing, and so we get excited, we organize, and we go and prep, and it's like the decision's already made. And so it's like, to the point Leah's making, it's like once the last fiscal year's budget is passed, it's like that's when you start. And because the decisions get made before you get to that point. And so you have to understand the process, being, again, what we said in the beginning, of being in conversation, being curious, and using the tools that you have to understand process, and where are the opportunities until we're able to change it better for civic engagement. Like, where are the opportunities for you to really have an impact in the process? And then I think the second thing I said, like being a labor organizer, collective action, I think is core, right? I think we always say to workers, like, you could go ask by yourself, or you can bring the whole department with you. Which one do you think is more likely to be successful? And I think in the same ways, when you're advocating, sure, if you want to communicate your personal, issue or concern or thing you want to change, but who are other people that care about that too? And how do you meet them? And Jeannette was naming some of the organizations locally that do grassroots organizing around the issues we care about. And I think the importance of linking up with those people to be able to be more impactful is it's important as well.
So I'm just checking the chat to see if there are any questions. I think we have one here. My biggest pain point is having to request accommodations when advocating at a local level. How can we change this policy to make accommodations automatic without asking for it, especially during emergency meetings? Leah, would you like to take that one?
Sure. Again, like I keep returning to this point that Roxey made about relationships. It's everything. Building relationship. It's possible that your elected official has no idea this is a problem. So give them the opportunity to know this is a problem. Now, if they refuse to help, then, maybe it's time to go on the offensive, but reach out to their office, reach out to their staff, say, I really want to participate, but I'm having accessibility issues. And I really don't want to have to ask every single time I show up to a meeting. And I think you'd be pleasantly surprised that there are allies on the inside who, they just don't think about it. And unfortunately, it's unfortunate that has to be on you to ask, but I think just exactly just the way you put it in the chat here, like, I really shouldn't have to ask for this every single time. This should be accessible to everybody. And these are the problems I'm having. So make them aware. They might not know.
Let me see if there are any other questions.
It occurs to me, Let me ask a question. Isn't it a law that they have to be accessible? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
That's a lot of that's a lot of leverage.
It is, and gently remind them of that. Seriously, and maybe not so gently.
All right, so I don't see any other questions, so I have another question. I'm curious to know, because I love hearing feel-good stories, right? I love hearing stories where things work, right? So it's like, what is a campaign that you worked on that you're most proud of and you were happy for the outcome and like you'd like to share it?
That's organizing in Florida, but okay. I'm thinking.
We have to celebrate.
Yeah. I'm thinking of I have a lot of electoral campaigns, but I'm trying to think of
I've got one.
Okay.
I've got one. I'll tell you, I wasn't heavily involved in this campaign, but it's really one that I loved for a lot of reasons. And this was maybe back in 2013, the campaign to save the libraries. I don't know if you all remember that.
I do.
But this was around budget time, and there were proposed at the county, the mayor was proposing a bunch of cuts to the library system, and people were upset. And it was, the reason I loved the campaign was that it was coalition building in the best way possible. You had library workers, you had, parents, you had just regular citizens, and then you had lots of the organizations and groups all coming together around this one issue of the libraries. And just the way that they conducted that campaign was so smart. It was, they had a great social media presence. They were really good on the traditional media. And a bunch of people turned out. I mean, it was one of the best turnouts I'd ever seen. And they ended up very successful in their advocacy efforts. So I think there was a lot to learn about the way that campaign ran, particularly on local issues. And, maybe it's unique because the libraries unify so many people and it's nonpartisan and they provide so many services. But to me, that's one of the most successful campaigns I've seen locally that isn't, like an electoral campaign.
Shout out to our libraries. I use mine every single week.
The library is great.
Roxey, do you have anything that stands out?
I mean, most of my work is at the state and federal level, so there are things that's standing out there, and then the local stuff that feels really grounded that I was involved. Nothing's coming to mind, which is sad. I think what I would say in that case then is because there are things that you work on that you don't win, but that those campaigns can still be satisfying as well if we're able to do some of the things Leah spoke about, right? Build deeper connection, create synergies, build base, and also that the relationships and the organizing doesn't stop. That the understanding is that you build your campaigns where the result you're trying to get to is the change in policy or the thing, but that there are also other goals that are important for the long-term, power, right, of the people in a community of having the capacity to people that know how to call the media or, do a press conference, or building capacity, people who know how to make flyers and use social media. If we can build campaigns and efforts that aren't just the result of winning the policy change or not is the only end result that matters, but then how have we connected, how have we built communities to be able to carry that on to the next thing or the next opportunity to organize. I think that's probably the most impactful thing I can add, because everything at a local level, our other locals really do that work. And my stuff, because we're healthcare workers, our stuff is at the state level. So have stuff there and at the federal level, but not at the local level. But I would also just say it is important that we're building campaigns and efforts that leave our community stronger, right?
Yeah, and I completely agree. We have a question here, and then before I get to that, I just wanted to touch upon something that you said in terms of campaigns always have a goal, right? It's like it's to get out the vote, or it's a policy change, where it may be, and then sometimes things don't go the way we want them to go. So if there's one personal takeaway that you can give in terms of like what keeps you motivated, what fills your cup, if you will, because a lot of times 2020 was a very hard year for multiple reasons, and we had very, very low points and we had a few high points. So coming into 2021, is there anything that you did to prepare to keep you going, to keep yourself going? You know what I mean? Like keep yourself motivated, to encourage others to do the same.
I'll go first. Well, like Roxey said, you know, there's a lot of unsuccessful campaigns, which means that you kind of need to really reframe how you think about winning. Like the outcome of a particular campaign cannot be the only thing that motivates you. Otherwise, you will not stick around, because you know you lose a lot in this world, and it could be really discouraging. But if you get something out of a campaign, like you said, stronger relationships, you know, an organizing base, you've encouraged people to step up and run for office, you know, I think you need to think about not just winning the campaign, but winning in other ways, building a stronger foundation of advocacy. How do I keep myself going? There's just some things I don't compromise on. I exercise, I sleep, you know, like pretty basic, but you cannot let yourself go and get completely wrapped up by a campaign or by an organization. I mean, you still need to take care of yourself. So I think that's really important. 2020 was pretty hard. Just the amount of the news coming at you, the insanity. I don't think most people want it to be that way though. So I think part of what's motivating me now is cleaning up the mess.
And for me, I think, Leah, I agree. And so I love that you started with sort of, you know, what you do for yourself personally. I think in this work, I did this work, you know, for almost 2 decades, and, you know, in my mid 30s, you know, I got high blood pressure and, you know, diabetes because I wasn't taking care of myself, right? I wasn't centered in how I was doing it, because when you do work that is from your soul, something you really believe in, you can lose yourself. So I love that you started with that, because I think that's core. You've got to know, because you have to be able to use yourself in this work if you want to be effective. And I think about the quote that former President Obama always referenced from King about the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think that core belief I also hold, right? And not in a way of like things are going to work out, but that there are enough of us who are driving and designing and creating and feeling that we are also helping to shape the bend. And I fully accept that my role in it might not be to see us at the promised land, but that my role in it is to do my part and run my leg and pass the baton. And so I think that centering helps me not just, you know, I get depressed, y'all, when we lose, but I'll find a way to come back. And I think the 2 things that I would say keeps me going and has been in the, you know, COVID and the last 2020 and races, all of it. Passion in people, right? We oftentimes are, you know, capitalist society, we think about urgency and task and results, and like that's the way we move. But what I felt and found is most life-giving for me is that I do work that's centered in my passion, and I do it with people that I enjoy and love. And we don't all get to do that, but I have, and my whole career hasn't been that, but I have worked hard enough and long enough that I am now choosing to be in spaces where that's my reality. And I think I also could have chosen those things earlier, but I didn't know to want them. And so I think those are critical pieces of how you keep yourself sustained in the work.
Oh my God. Yes, yes, yes. I'm so glad Catalyst is recording these because I will be referring back to this one for sure. That was excellent advice from both of you. So we have a question in the chat. Real estate development / affordable housing issues are so important. Any advocacy tips for CRA, city, or county commission hearings?
I mean, specific to affordable housing issues, aside from the tips that we've already shared, I mean, and showing up and getting involved early in the process, I don't know that I have anything particular to share about those issues. You know, get to know who's in that industry. There's definitely like a cottage industry of people in this business. Get to know who they are.
Yeah, there are a lot of health justice project. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong. Or the housing justice project. There are lots of groups that are doing this work that I'm now messing up their names, that if you just research, like powerful, smart, great people that you can link up with, because I think especially like when I think about organizing as a labor organizer, I say to our workers, like, why should you join in a union? Like, what are the reasons, or why should we join together politically to make sure public policy is better for patients and for caregivers? Well, we'll just look at what our employers are doing. They're in associations, right? They're using collective power to use their resources to be able to shape public policy. So I think a lot of times we think like we're the lone wolf going out there to do this thing that we feel convicted about, but how are we doing it collectively? How are we finding like-minded people? And you know, SEIU's motto is that we're stronger together. We believe that. And I think the other bit of advice I would say is just to underscore what Leah just said, find your people. Find your people, anchor in with your people, and then move together.
Then we have about 5 minutes left. We have one more question. How do we as citizens work towards making a more participatory budgeting process, because it often feels like a full-time job just to keep up? And if you caught that panel the other day, it gave you a lot of food for thought. I was writing seriously about budgeting.
It's a full-time job. I'll be really honest. Government runs on inertia. It's really hard to change processes. And I don't want to say that's a bad thing, because every process that exists in government exists because it was responding to a particular situation, and often they just outlive their usefulness, right? So it becomes just grinding bureaucracy and nothing can move. How do you make budget more participatory? I mean, first of all, you start by asking for that. It's possible that and here's a piece of advice: find the people on the inside who believe in that and who agree with you. You'd be amazed how many people in government are just as annoyed with the way that the government works as you are. You know, I count myself among the people that I'm always astonished when I learn, like, oh, this is the way it works. Find those people. Those are reform-minded people. They need to be empowered. They need support from the outside, because they're working just like, you know, maybe you work at a job and you don't feel empowered to speak up. Like they have bosses, and their bosses have bosses, and make it known that that's something that you want. I also think that there's nothing stopping an organization like Catalyst from doing its own participatory budgeting workshop, right? Like make your own fantasy budget. And I think you all have done stuff like that before, so I'm not saying that you haven't, but if you want it, like make it exist. I guess that would be my advice.
One of the campaigns we're running right now at the federal level is the people's budget. Like we do a people's budget review, we do it at a county level, but we're SEIU and some strategic partners, Florida Immigrant Coalition, Florida Rising, others are thinking and having conversations about how do we do a budgeting process that's actually participatory and mirrors like what's happening in the States. So we're calling it the people's budget. I wish I had the link to share right now, but I don't. But look, Google that, we have that. And I didn't think I was gonna have anything to add to this, but I do. And I think sometimes we look at these problems are so like inertia and like bureaucracies that are old are really hard. Change is hard, period. I've been trying to lose weight for like a decade. And I know it's for my health, and it hasn't happened. But because change is hard, right? And So I think she's like magnified, right, at a level where it's like a whole bureaucracy. So I think I would find one thing in the budget. We sometimes like it's all or nothing. We have to find the one thing, one pressure point that you can like see you have a solution for, and you know who can make it happen. Go at that one thing. I think sometimes we try to do like wholesale, but there's strategic wisdom in like finding the thing that is most painful, going at that, and then moving on from there. So wanted to just add that.
I love it. So thank you to the tech gods that nothing happened during our presentation. Just wrapping things up, here are some of the standouts from our conversation today that people can take with them. Show up like you belong. Relationships are everything. Be curious. Keep imposter syndrome in check as much as possible. Learn about local journalists. Read your local newspapers. Ask questions. Run for office. And most importantly, reframe how you think of winning, and make sure that you take care of yourself first. So I thank you, Leah and Roxey, for such an incredible conversation. I hope everyone sticks around for the workshops, because we're going to do some breakout sessions and really dive deep into some of the things that we discussed here. And thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.